I am Ken Blair. I am class of 2013 from Mercer University. I graduated there with a degree in organizational leadership with a minor in education. From Mercer University. 6 months later, I was employed there and I worked there for 7 years at Mercer University, where I just recently left to become the director of first year experience here at Wesleyan College. So not only did Mercer invest in me as a student, they also invested in me as a professional, and I'm forever grateful. At this time, I will turn it over to the co-chair, Ms. Catherine Ficklin, to welcome you all to tonight's event.
Good evening, Bears, and happy homecoming week. We're so excited to have you guys here. As Ken stated, this year's theme for our homecoming is focusing on what matters. And with that in mind, I'd like to welcome you to our first installment of our Diversity Talks. Mercer's Office of Diversity and Inclusion Initiatives and the Mercer African American Alumni Network are happy that you have joined us today. And we're excited to hear from our fellow alumnus, Mrs. Payton. In the spirit of our social media blast, thank you all for wearing your Mercer shirts. I see some homecoming shirts here today. So thank you guys for wearing your homecoming shirts. Don't forget to take a picture of your shirts and post it on with our hashtag on social media. In the chat box, I'm going to post a link to our African American Alumni Facebook page, as well as our postable link, so that we can stay in contact with all of you guys to let you know what great things we have coming up. And thank you for calling in, and we hope to see you at some of our other events this week. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Ken to introduce our moderator, and we can get on with the evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Thank you. So I have the great honor and the great privilege of introducing our moderator for tonight's event. Dr. Ansley Booker is a graduate of Mercer University and currently serves as the director in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion Initiatives. She's the advisor for several campus organizations, a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and was recently featured as a faculty speaker for the Mercer's Pilgrimage to Penfield 2020. And she is featured in the latest Macon magazine, the Leadership Edition. I present to some and introduce to others the fabulous and the awesome Ms. Ansley Booker. Let's give her a round of applause, you guys. Yeah. Dr. Booker.
Yes, thank you so very much, Mr. Blair. Thank you so very much, Ms. Ficklin. I do appreciate that introduction. I'm always nervous when people do an introduction. I gotta make sure you live up to it. So I do thank you so very much. So what I want to do is I want to thank everyone here for joining us tonight. I think this is going to be an awesome event. I just love the spirit that you all brought prior to the conversation. I almost feel as though I don't need to introduce our speaker for tonight because y'all are such great friends. I see so much support and love for her tonight, but I will do the introduction and the bio before we get started in the sake of time, okay? Thank you so very much. So Miss Payton grew up and went to high school in Macon, Georgia, right here in Macon, Georgia. She received a BS degree from Mercer University in 1972. She completed another BS degree in medical technology from Medical College of Georgia in Augusta. And in 1971, her husband became a graduate of Mercer University and also became a 1975 graduate of the Medical College of Georgia in the School of Medicine. And at that time, they actually established a solo practice in Athens, Georgia, and worked together for about 38 years. After retiring from the medical practice, Gwen continued to pursue a career as a professional portrait artist, but she also missed educating others on preventative health and wellness. She then earned her certificate as a health coach as a result. In addition to painting, she currently enjoys sharing education and resources to help families live healthier lifestyles. In June of 2020, Gwen and her husband Victor celebrated 49 years of marriage. Awesome, awesome, awesome. And they have 4 adult children and 7 grandchildren. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Miss Gwendolyn Payton onto the stage to answer some of our virtual questions. All right, Miss Payton, thank you so very much for joining us. And thank you to all the esteemed alums and family and friends to join us tonight. I want to really get right into the conversation because, again, we know that she celebrated an excellent milestone over the last course of a few weeks by having an art gallery showing here at Mercer University. So again, could you tell us a little bit about that ceremony and what that meant to you?
Okay, so that I won't get as emotional as I might, As we go through, I do want to acknowledge that we lost a dear friend this past Sunday in Dr. Charles Roberts, who not only was one of our Upward Bound counselors at Mercer University, but he most recently, he was a professor at Mercer University. And I just want to acknowledge this to his family, if any of them are listening in, that he was Chucky to us, and we really, really will miss him. An amazing person. So we want to, I actually want to just say a quick prayer to the Roberts family, just that the family from Mercer and the family from Upward Bound, we would not have made it this far, many of us, without the encouragement of Dr. Roberts. So thank you. Your question was about why I was had a recent celebration.
Yes.
And as you had mentioned, I did attend Mercer from 1968 to 1972. And in 1972, I graduated from Mercer with a biology degree. But that was not the only degree that I had worked very, very hard for. I did the coursework for a degree also in studio art. At the time that I was there, the professor, as a freshman, the very first time I went into the building and met him, he looked at me and he said, Negroes are not smart enough to get a degree from my department. The most you might get is C, and I guess that would be for colored. Those are almost exactly his words. I had heard something of that before. I heard that from the principal of my high school, A.L. Miller High, that I graduated from in 1968. So it was not alarming to hear that. I wasn't expecting it, but it was not alarming to hear it. But I didn't even let that faze me, because I was going to school to get my degree from the university. So I really didn't think it was a serious statement at the time. I continued to go through the 4 years of doing the coursework. And towards the end of the 4 years, at 3 years, my husband and I got married in June of 1971. And lo and behold, I came back to Mercer pregnant, September 1971, with my oldest son. And unbeknownst to me, the professor, the head of the department, he had a plan. And when I told him that I was pregnant, that I was going to finish all my coursework by the end of the winter quarter, he said that I would need to show my artwork in the senior exhibit in the spring. And I told him that I was working on that. He said I'd also need to take a course that only he taught in the spring. And I told him that that wouldn't be possible, that my baby was due in May, and I was not going to be able to be there because I was leaving to go down to Augusta where my husband was. And at the time, he told me that if I didn't take that course, then I probably wouldn't be able to get my degree. Well, I knew that that course was not one of the upper level courses, so I started taking upper level courses to just make up for that. Anyway, long story short, when I ran up to the art building and looked at the candidates, the list of candidates for a major in art, my name was not on the list. And I was pretty much devastated. I'll never forget running across the campus and getting to the phones. No cell phones then. The phones were in certain places in the dormitory, and calling my husband, who was in Augusta, and let him know that I was not listed as a candidate for the art degree. And I went back to the building with the encouragement of my husband to talk with the chairman again. And he said that even if I could take the course, my artwork that he had looked at was several pieces were controversial, and he could not let me enter them into the senior exhibit. And I didn't realize at the time, but later, that's what kept me from getting my degree, was that I did not exhibit. I had all the coursework, but I did not exhibit. So trying to make this long story shorter, because this is just the first question. But I had tried back in 2013. Again, I wrote a letter to the dean at the time and asked him to review my coursework and everything. And they wrote me back that I would need to take about 32 more hours in order to get the degree. But what they were doing was they were looking at me with the requirements that are now, as opposed to the requirements from 1968 when I started. So anyway, again, that was a closed door at the time because I was not going to go back and take 32 hours of courses. But a year ago, almost to the day, a year ago, I was in the airport at 12 midnight. And if the ones of you who know me, you know, I'm going to talk to a trash can if that's all I got to talk to. But thank goodness there was someone more beautiful and more amazing than another bench, empty bench. And that was Dr. Sarah Gardner. I scooted over to her bench and I started to talk to her. And she told me that she was a professor at Mercer in history. And I was like, oh, I went to Mercer. I majored in history. And then I changed my major because they had nothing in the history books about me. So why major in history? And so I went on to tell her that I had gotten my degree in biology, but not in art. And when I told her my story, she said that there's something needs to be done about that. She said, that is so wrong and we need to make it right. I didn't know how serious she was until she called me a couple of days later and asked me if I would meet with the Dean of Liberal Arts now, who is Dean Anita Gustafson. And I did. One day after my birthday last year, I met with her and she offered me the opportunity to do an exhibit, an art exhibit, because they did confirm that I had done all the coursework. And so that's the celebration.
Amazing, amazing, amazing.
Angela, do you want me to continue or did you have a specific question now?
Yes. Well, really, it was about the question about how did you feel about your experience at Mercer, which I think you kind of added a little bit to that already. But if you want to elaborate a little bit more on that, I think that would be great because that was our next question.
Okay, well, you know, my experience at Mercer may have been a little bit different than some of the other African-American students that started in my class. Many of the students were a part of an Upward Bound program. And I know you asked that later, but I want to go ahead and center that right now because it's pertinent. In 1965, a group of people came to the high school that I was going to. The high school, by the way, was an all-girls school. Not recommended. I'm sorry, I don't recommend an all-girls high school. It was predominantly a Caucasian school and it was all girls. But they came because the students there had already had some association of building relationships with people of a different culture. So it was sort of the feeding ground. My high school, the African Americans there got first opportunity to go into Mercer University in the Upward Bound program, which was a government funded grant program to introduce minority students who probably may or may not go to college to a college campus. And that was done by Dr. Dean Joe Hendricks. He was instrumental in getting the Upward Bound program on the Mercer campus. So in 1965, I was 15 years old, a sophomore in high school. I started with the Upward Bound program, and for 3 years, we were able to go onto the campus during the spring months, and then during the summer, we would go and stay on campus, and we would be involved in many different activities that we never would have thought, never would have dreamed of being on stage in the Glass Menagerie at Mercer in the Upward Bound program, or being a part of a group that was making great strides in doing something we never thought about. We were actually breaking barriers all around the state of Georgia. I don't know if some of you on the phone, on the Zoom, remember when we went to Callaway Gardens. And I know that places are very different now, but when we got off our busload of African Americans getting off at the beach, you would have thought someone said shark, okay? Everybody left the water. Everybody left the water. People were grabbing their kids and pulling them like someone said shark. And it was crazy. But we did that in many places, Jekyll Island, Georgia. It was amazing. But yeah, that was part of our experience at Mercer.
Okay. Thank you so very much. So the next question, I want to talk a little bit more about your exhibit. So if you could give us more insight into your exhibit, Faith of a Dreamer, Opposition to the Truth may derail the dream, but the faith of the dreamer prevails. I just love that title. Could you tell us a little bit about your paintings and your portraits that you had in the exhibit and why you chose that specific title?
Okay, I'm going to bring my notes up too. Okay, so the faith of a dreamer, I became an abiding, faithful believer in God and Christ in my late 30s, honestly. I've gone to church all my life, but there's a difference. And in the late 30s, when I was in my late 30s, I really did decide that I wanted to put my faith in a higher power. And I learned as much as I could from the Bible and knew that God was real. And so that made a difference in a lot of things that had happened to me at Mercer. Going back to Mercer in the fall of 1971, some of you may have read in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that there was a very extremely emotional situation. Other than me having to deal with the head of the department, we had a cousin in my family who was killed by someone who on the stand, and I know he said this because I was in the courtroom, he said he was out nigger hunting because niggers weren't supposed to be out after midnight. And those types of things were done during that time, and blatantly, and there was no justice done. As a matter of fact, I really appreciate the editor who did the story for the AJC, because when I told her that I didn't think that this man ever served a day in jail, she researched it and couldn't find him on any prison, any penitentiary list. So those types of things, when you think about, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but when you think about Black Lives Matter, and I'm not violent at all, you know me, you know that, but that's what it means. That's what it means, that we've gone through many, many centuries of Black lives not mattering, that someone could go out, decide that they could go out and shoot a young 18-year-old who came home for Thanksgiving to his mother who was bedridden with MS. And he never even saw my nephew's face because he shot, my cousin's face, because he shot him in the back. So that was happening in 1971. And then we were also, this was probably our second year of working really hard to get Black studies on the campus at Mercer. So if you ask me, why didn't I fight for my degree at that time? That was not one of those battles that needed to be won. I needed to be in the courtroom every day that man was on trial. I needed to be with the group that was trying to fight for the Black studies on campus. So that was why. But going back to the faith of the dreamer, I am a very faith-filled person, if you know me. And I don't just talk about faith. I really believe. And with what happened that fall of 71, there was a lot that I had to deal with when I came to faith, because I didn't understand why life had been so difficult and things had been so horrible. But God has a way of helping you to understand that. And if you don't remember but one word of what I say tonight, I'm giving you this word, and this word is called forgiveness. It is called forgiveness. I am not harmed in any form or fashion by Dr. Doherty today. I'm not harmed by it. But I am here to share with you so that you can learn from these experiences. The faith of the dreamer has to do with my faith and the fact that no matter what you do in life, you keep your faith. It came from my mother, a big part of my faith in going through and dealing with the things that I have dealt with in life came from the fact that I saw her, the mother of 9, continue to be strong no matter what each one of us, you guys have 2 or 3 children and they're pulling your hair out. Think if you had 9. And that's what helped me when I had dealt with my 4, was I would always say to myself, well, mom had 9, I can deal with this. But that's where that title comes from, and just thinking about opposition to the truth. The truth will prevail. It may not even prevail in your lifetime, but it will. And I just believe that.
I love that so much. And so my next question talks about advice. And I know one piece of advice you just really gave us is the power of forgiveness. And so one other thing I wanted to know, what other advice would you have for current Mercer students or Mercer alumni that have been mistreated or have had their work to go unrecognized at this time?
Oh my goodness. Share with your family. I did share that with my family. Share your experiences, share your struggles, share your indiscretions. I literally stole an art book from the art department, from the student bookstore, because I was so upset with Dr. Doherty. It was the heaviest book, and I was pregnant, okay? I was walking out of that store with this big art history book under my stomach. But share your life. Share it with those who are close to you, and share it with those who, if you have a thought and you have an instant to share it with people, because you don't know what people's experiences are. You don't know where they're coming from or where they've come from. You have no idea, but you're in that position with that person for a reason. Now, I had no idea when I met Dr. Sarah that she had missed flights and she had been coming from Europe, and all kinds of things had set me and her there at the same time. I don't even know what made me share that particular story with her, because I don't usually do that. But we need to hear those, because that would start healing for us. Now, I had taken care of being healed from those situations long before I met Dr. Sarah, yes, because I couldn't live my life, with the bitterness and the hatred that had come out of those situations when they initially happened. I didn't want my children to hear that in my voice when I talked about Mercer or going to college. I didn't want them to hear that I'd had the type of experiences. My mom told us one thing. A lot of people say, and I've heard a lot of people in my African American community say, you have to be twice as good. You have to work twice as hard. You know what? I was thankful my mother never told me that. My mother told me just to be your best self. Do your best. Because when you start to compare with someone else, you'll live your life in comparison. Mm-hmm. If you decide that you can be your best self, and that's good enough, you will have a better chance of getting what you want.
I love that. I love that. Be your best self. So I think you shared a little bit about some of the experiences you've had with racial discrimination in and around the county and throughout your family. Is there anything else you would like to talk about a little bit about racial discrimination or?
Well, I think that unfortunately, and I've just recently gone through a course that I've learned, I went through a 6-week course. And by the way, we 70-year-old people, you young people, we're still learning.
That's right.
We're still wanting to learn and wanting to grow. actually, I just finished a course that took me back into the history of not only America and racism, but also the history of Christianity. And I would like to encourage all of you to learn your history so that you would be able to help others. And one of the things I wanted to share, one of the instances that I wanted to share from racial situations at Mercer was I did have some difficulties with some of the students in the art department. They would write notes on my desk, you know, go home, nigger, go home. You know, they would do little things with my in my station. But it just didn't matter what they were doing at the time. I had other things on my mind. I knew I was going to work hard, but there were those types of things happening in my classroom. My husband had a very, very scary experience at a local downtown local fast food restaurant, and where someone came in, and it was him and two or three other students, and apparently the girl behind the counter, she was Caucasian, and she may have, I don't know that she had any reason to call her boyfriend, who was on the local police squad, who brought in a carbine and stood behind my husband and the other students. And those types of things were common in Macon at the time. And I think they were more common than they should have been, simply because the mayor of Macon he literally bought a tank, a military tank, and drove it down the middle of the street to call for what he called keeping the peace. And it did just the opposite. It caused more fear than anything, and that's really sad. But yeah, it was a lot of different things going on. I think a lot of the African American students were experiencing different things. Some of the more heartbreaking things were, you know, my Caucasian friend on campus, her boyfriend came to the dormitory, and she said, my boyfriend's downstairs. I was like, okay, let's go meet him, because we had the best time just getting to know each other, being friends in the dormitory. But then she said, no. She said, no, he can't meet you. And I'm so dense at the time. I'm going, why? You know, and she said, because he doesn't approve that Mercer has Black students on campus. He no, can't meet him. And that was pretty heartbreaking, you know, but hey, those types of things were happening for sure.
I love that. I love that you're able now at this point in your life to reflect back on some of these more difficult memories and still have peace and still have love and appreciation for your, you know, for your experience and for those that may have been experiencing things differently from yourself. So another question I wanted to look at tonight was, what lessons do you think that you learned and your other fellow students learned during this time?
You know, I think that when you're thrust into a situation, and we were literally thrust into a situation, we didn't know a lot of the background of what was going on with Mercer in terms of admitting African American students. We didn't know. I think of this as the story in the Bible where Elisha says, someone runs to Elijah and he said, like, we're in a position where we have three armies coming against us. And he said, you know what? Just open your eyes so you can see. And what happened, we came in there, we saw that they needed some African American studies. We were thinking, we got to do this. We had no idea. There had been things in the works for years. Honestly, Dr. Rufus Harris, he graduated from Mercer as an undergraduate in 1917. And he was the president of Mercer when I was there. And way back when he graduated from Mercer and then went to law school at Mercer, he had it in his mind that Mercer was going to change. So there were things already in the works that we weren't aware of. And you asked me about allies and another question. Those were things that we didn't know. So here we are. We're sitting in the cafeteria in the student union trying to come up with a plan. And there was already things going on. And when we finally shared that we had a plan to try and get African American studies on campus, we had allies like Dean Trimble and Joe Hendricks and Gene Hendricks, who had already, they were like, okay, let's put our plan together and see how it can work. And that made the biggest difference, having allies. So we learned that, and I know this to be true, and I'll share this with you, there are always allies, always, always. You just got to look, listen, and be willing to, when that voice tells you, share with this person or talk to that person, to step out of your own comfort zone. Don't hold yourself back. And the other thing I would say in terms of lessons was to be unified. When you're trying to do anything, the more people you have that can come together in a sensible way and make a plan, the more likely you're going to reach your goal. I'll tell you a situation that happened after we had started the Black Student Union, and the Mercer had literally allowed us to use one of their houses. Lo and behold, we had some students that came down from the University of Georgia, good old Bulldogs, who wanted to start some fraternities and sororities on the campus. And I don't have anything against any group of people for sororities and fraternities, but at that time, it was only about 50 to 60 African-American students on a campus of about 5,000. So at that time, we really couldn't afford to separate. And we had gotten the ball rolling so well that it happened that we got the student studies on campus before I graduated. But when the students came down and they, my husband was reflecting on it the other day. He said, everybody went to the student union and different sororities and fraternities. They started taking their books and notes and things that we all had been privy to, and it dissipated. The unity that we had it was broken down, and we had not completely finished doing what we started out to do. So, once you set a goal and you start with a group, stay unified. Don't let anything break you up. And I think that caused quite some friction among us, of course, right?
I love that story because I think one of the goals that the Student Government Association had was to form a committee called Merclusion. And so it was basically what you're just saying, to bring more unity and solidarity by bringing the groups together so they could unite under one umbrella and have similar goals and common goals to help, push the university forward. So I think that's a good step in the right direction. And someone, a current student or a set of current students recognize that same issue on campus. And I think that's excellent that they were able to recognize that and, put into action a plan already. So that's great. So another question I want to ask you really quickly is, what helped you to persevere during these difficult times and just even persist on to graduation? Experiencing so much trauma and so much loss at such an early age.
My mother. You think I'm going to start at Mercer and not finish? No way. She had encouraged me to go to the high school, the all girls high school, and there was no way that I was not going to finish that. And I had one older sister that was at Fort Valley State College. She's a couple of years older than me, but out of 9 of us, I think it ended up being only four of us that actually graduated from after high school. So Mom had a very big influence on me to graduate. And then the people, we all had really great big goals. We went to college and we had learned so much I know for me and some of the Upward Bounders had learned so much about the world from Upward Bound, and that we could do and we could go and we could be. So I think that in a sense that there were other things that may have separated us, but I think that overall we all encouraged each other and wanted each other to graduate.
I love that. Especially persistence is a big part of the Upward Bound program. I know in the past we have, I've worked with the Upward Bound program, and so has Ken, and TRIO programs are very strong here at Mercer University. So I want to ask you, could you tell us a little bit more about your Upward Bound experience? I know you had some great field trips to IB and Jackal, but Jekyll Island, but what are some other experiences that you remember about the Upward Bound program? Because for those who don't know, Mercer University was one of the universities that was the pilot program for actually getting the Upward Bound program started in 1965 under the Higher Education Act. So we have a very, very strong history and tradition with Upward Bound. And so I really would love to highlight that program and also talk about some of your experiences.
Wow. Well, again, the Upward Bound counselors, people like Dr. Charles Roberts. Dr. Roberts started at Mercer, I think, in 1966. And so several of the students, African American students, were quickly brought on to be counselors to the Outward Bound program. And I think that having those people there as mentors, seeing people who were already at Mercer was really huge for us. Seeing African American students that were already at Mercer, Betty Walker, I can remember some of the people that were there and that were really encouraging to us. The fact that the Outward Bound program allowed most of us who had never been away from home to come into the dormitory and to be able to live and feel like we were on our own, and we were having to make decisions about our life at a very young age, making decisions about what's right and what's wrong, what's best, was amazing. We had students from other smaller counties, even smaller than Bibb County. Some of I remember several of the people, Joe Ben Green. I remember several of the people from the smaller cities that were there. But and then to be introduced to a school, the facilities at Mercer at the time were literally second to none. In terms of the theater, in terms of being able to produce our own little, what we called our yearbook. And I think that we were involved in radio. I'm not sure. Some of you on the call may remember. I see you nodding your head, Nadine. Did we have a radio station? Yeah, I think we did. Had something that okay, I'm not sure. But being introduced to different things that we had not had any familiarity with, that allowed us to be able to. I remember one of the guys who was the director of the play, just how he just took on that role. And I'm sure he was from a very small county. I'm sure he probably had no idea he could do that. I could be this person. I could take on this role. And I think that was one of the most important things that came out of Upward Bound for us, giving us the sense that there's a whole big world out there and you've gotten a little taste of it. And if you want more, you can go for it.
I love that. I love that. I know when I first came and was working here at Mercer University as a graduate student, one of my first projects was to do a digital yearbook for the students. So we had a great time with recording songs and dances. They even did like a talent show, variety show. Mr. Blair helped create an Upward Bound song. So the tradition still lives. So that's awesome. That's amazing. So one other question that I wanted to ask really quickly, because I know we're getting close to our time. I do want to leave time for other Q&A questions. What inspires you in your artwork today?
I still hear my mom. She passed away on April 27th of this year. But I still hear her encouraging me. My dad was an artist, but he passed away at the age of 56. And that's why I am strong in the way of, health and wellness, as well as wanting to continue to be creative. But I just don't think that I've gotten to my potential in art yet because of my career in the medical field. I think that right now, I feel like I'm like 30 years old and I'm going to start to be an artist again and do the things that I have an opportunity to do. So yeah, I am inspired by, I'm inspired by every child that I see smiling. I love children and I look forward to doing my daughter-in-law, Stacy Payton, you see her on the call here. Stacy has two girls and I just recently did a watercolor of her daughter and one of my other granddaughters. And I'm really excited to just be able to paint what I want to paint and enjoy.
I love that. I love that. So my next question was, I was there at your presentation when you received your degree and was able to see your exhibit and just was so in awe of your amazing talent and then your faith that you speak so highly of. So thank you for sharing that part of you. But the last question I wanted to ask, you mentioned in your speech to the audience and to members of faculty and staff and alumni on campus and current students, for them to read The Stem of Jesse. Why do you think that book is so important to our current students and to our current campus climate and culture?
Well, again, I spoke of it before, just knowing your history and just knowing, it's hard to know how to navigate any situation if you don't know about that situation, if you don't know the culture that you're involved in. And at the time that we started, we literally had no clue of the history of Mercer. You know, that book, The Stem of Jesse, it talks about, as a matter of fact, I decided I would, if you asked me about it, not that, I'm not going to even say that, but I want to share with you, just after we got the Black Studies Department, Dr. Terry Todd, and I remember him very distinctly. Dr. Terry Todd, he was interviewed for this book. It's called The Stem of Jesse, and I think that every alumni should look at it and every freshman should read this book to know the history. But Dr. Todd was interviewed. Notwithstanding his whiteness, Terry Todd approached the task of being Mercer's first director of Black Studies with the same aplomb as he had competitively faced with the bench press or whatever. And then he remembers an early experience. I had a young woman in the first class by the name of Gwen Middleton, and she was a force. She was on the small side, but built like an athlete or a dancer, and she was filled with electricity and anger. And she and some of her other students seemed to me to be in need of some type of confrontation. And so I invited one of Mercer's senior professors. Now, he says I'm in need of confrontation, and he invites the very professor that wrote the book that was used in every public school for Georgia history that talked about how happy slaves were. And he didn't talk about any accomplishments of African Americans. So he invites Dr. Spencer King to be confronted by us. And it says, Todd read from the book, including those pages, and then asked Dr. King to explain to the Black students how he had come to write them. Following his torturous endeavor to explain, Gwen Middleton and others told him how much they were hurt when they were required to read those books in junior high that had no accomplishments of African Americans. So that's just one part of this book, but this author, his name is Will D. Campbell, he wrote pretty much several summaries of the first 2 or 3 classes that were African Americans at Mercer, and he wrote about doctors and lawyers and just all of the accomplishments of those people, and that's important too. It's very important for the African Americans to know that the history of the people who first started at Mercer.
Yes, I love that. Visibility, representation, and definitely history is important, especially in our UMB classes, for our students where they get exposure to a lot of these courses. There's now a diversity module that students get to go through. They were able to read the STEM of Jesse this summer before coming to the university. I think those are excellent opportunities. And thank you so very much for sharing those words of wisdom. One last thing before we open the floor up for questions. Did you have any last thoughts or words of advice that you would like to share with any of our current students, alumni, faculty, or staff that may be on the call tonight?
Well, I think that what I've come to learn is I've missed a lot from Mercer. And I think that comes from the damage of what, if I have to say it was a damage done, it was probably that I didn't have the longing to go back to Mercer without my degree. And I didn't feel that it was fair for me not to have it. And so I didn't go back. But my family has been a part of Mercer's family. I have a sister who's 10 years younger than me, Regina McDuffie, who lives in Macon. She had been the city administrator a few years ago. She went to Mercer and graduated. One of my cousins actually was assistant coach of basketball there, Trelane at Mercer. I think that from one of my classmates said that his daughter had gone to Mercer. I wonder how many of us had family and members to go back to go to Mercer of the first classes that went to Mercer. But I think that was probably the damage that was done, that I didn't have that longing to go back there. And I've read a lot about Mercer, and I know that Mercer is an incredible place and has incredible people like you, Hensley, and people like Ken, people that have come through and have basically, to some extent, benefited from what we did, but carried the torch even further and carries it even higher. And I think that Mercer, in and of itself, as the private Baptist college that it started out to be, is by far, to me, one of the most impactful schools in terms of racial equity in the state of Georgia. I can definitely say that. And I am very proud to be an alumni of Mercer.